Hey there guys, alright, today we were back with some potential history, this time the Russo-Japanese War. Now, you guys didn't see in the last potential history video that I made, that I reacted to, we had the man himself give a little comment, say he loved me. You know, nothing too serious. My ego is hyperinflated now. I can't do that seriously. Anyways, before we dive into the video, make sure you go check out the links below in my pinned comment in the comment section or just in the description box below, where I have a link to my Twitch channel where I stream Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Fridays, and Saturdays from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. US Central Standard Time. Would love to have you guys throw me a follow and hang out in the chat. The other link there is the gaming channel link, which is where I'm just uploading old streams to. But now, let's talk about the Russo-Japanese War. Essentially, so my information on this war isn't the greatest. I know the base information of what happens in this war and essentially the effects and the cause and effects of this war. Essentially, Japan wants to spread, Russia wants to spread east. They kind of clash and they go to war, and then Russia gets their ass handed to them, and they are the first European power to get their ass handed to them by an Asian power. And specifically, you could also look at this as really the point in which you could definitively say that Japan has pretty much usurped the position of China in the region as the dominant power here. You of course could probably argue that around maybe the Meiji Emperor, that perhaps Japan had usurped China's position. Definitely after the Opium Wars, China's position is extremely weak in the region. But here, I think is the most obvious position to say Japan is the power in Asia at the moment. But then also what this war does is it allows Japan to further their imperialistic goals in the region, and really sets up the stage for the Sino-Japanese War in the 1930s. Or well, I guess the two Sino-Japanese Wars. You have the first one where Japan takes Manchuria, and then the second one, which is in 1937, which preludes World War II, or you could argue that really the invasion of China is the beginning of World War II, but also blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I went on a ramble there. Let's go ahead and learn from potential history. I love Tom and Jerry. Oh no. Bigfoot?
Yeah.
Much later.
This video is brought to you by Dashlane. Stay secure online and never forget a password again. More on that later. In 1904, the Russo-Japanese War took place, and it would eventually encompass one of the worst mimetic naval disasters in history, and we'll get to that. But there's a lot of other interesting things that happen in this war that are often glossed over. First, the setup, but I'll be brief because it's
The political cartoons from right before the war, when everyone thought the Russians would raffle stomp the Japanese, are hilariously ironic. Yes. Oh, this is probably what makes me love this war so much, is just everyone in the world is like, yeah, the Russians are gonna kick the Japanese ass, right? Because really and there's reason to believe that this would happen, right? Because prior to this war, right, you have the British essentially raffle stomping the Chinese in the Opium Wars, right? And everyone, like, China is known as the dominant power of Asia. So really, the expectations of the Japanese is low. And then also before this, right, you have, you know, the gunboat diplomacy of the United States coming in and essentially forcing Japan to open up trade to Europeans and the United States. So really, when you have the precedent here that we know of occurring in Asia, where European powers and then America kind of dominate, where none of the Asian nations have been capable of really telling them no at this point in time. You know, the predictions here, obviously, if you're going to place a safe bet here, you're going to place your bet on the Russians win.
Fairly complicated and not what the video's about. But basically,
And yes, also mostly racist. Definitely mostly racist. Because obviously, the idea of European supremacy over all peoples is very prevalent in this time period, and also kind of still carries over to this day.
kind of fell apart again because it tends to do that, and a lot of countries ran to make claims once this happened. After this, Japan attempted to make various claims in Korea and elsewhere that were shouted down by the European powers because apparently only Europeans are allowed to colonize. There's a bit more to this, but I'm going to go ahead and move on because the next thing is the only real important part. And that being that the Russians saw this as a golden opportunity to expand their territory, and had worked out a deal to where they now controlled the port of Port Arthur, and were constructing a railroad connecting it to the Trans-Siberian Railway, stationing a lot of troops in Manchuria to protect it. Now, Port Arthur was extremely important to the Russians because it was a warm water port, and warm water ports are like crack to them.
Oh yeah. They fucking love that shit. They start it up when they can.
The Japanese were upset about this, though, because it hindered their territorial expansion, especially into Korea, which they really wanted to annex. And it's at this point that the stage is set. In February of 1904, after months of fruitless negotiations, mostly over Korea, the Japanese fleet attacked the Russian Pacific Fleet in Port Arthur. This especially aggravated the Russians because on top of having their fleet destroyed, the Japanese declaration of war got to the Russian government after the attack had begun, which the Russians saw as unfair and underhanded. But given that a very similar sequence of events would unfold at Pearl Harbor, this would later become a theme for the Japanese.
Fair point.
Now, we'll get back to the naval war in a minute, but first, let's talk about the land war, which is often ignored. There were two sorts of fronts between the Russians and Japanese fighting in Manchuria. The first was the besieging and the eventual taking of Port Arthur by General Nogi Marisuke.
Please.
The combat around Port Arthur and what led up to its taking was extremely reminiscent of what eventually would be seen as the Western Front in World War I, with the Japanese digging complicated trenches toward Russian emplacements around the city. Although victorious, General Marisuke was not happy with the victory, extremely disappointed in himself for how many men he'd lost in the grinding attritional front, even requesting to commit suicide from the Emperor afterwards as he felt he had been dishonorable in his conduct. Slight tangent about Marisuke, he's an extremely interesting character all on his own. He was born 4 years before the opening of Japan into a very traditional samurai family, and grew up during Japan's rapid industrialization period. He became this mix of a very grandfatherly, caring figure for his men, and a hardened traditional Bushido warrior.
Shit, I want a story about this motherfucker. Damn. I want a goddamn movie about this man now.
After the war, he had some political appointments, and was a mentor to the future Emperor Hirohito.
Oh, I don't know nothing here.
And kept with his traditional beliefs to the very end, committing suicide along with his wife when Emperor Meiji died in 1912 in classic samurai fashion.
What? Why?
As far as the Russians go here, although General Stossel probably could
Apologies for the probable mispronunciation. That's right, alright. Anatoly, just take it.
not have won and beaten off the Japanese, there's a consensus that he probably could have held out longer, but got cold feet towards the end. And this is the theme you'll see repeated a few times in the Russian land forces. The war in the north was more a war of movement, with the different armies maneuvering around each other. The Russians in this sector, though, plagued by poor intelligence and frankly just nervous command, were never able to take advantage of superior numbers and crush the Japanese, even though they would have totally been able to. Japanese commanders in this sector often attacked extremely recklessly, holding no troops back as reserves. And instead of capitalizing on this, the Russians, having no idea how many Japanese there actually were, figured that these tactics were the result of Japanese confidence of other sources, most likely more troops or other maneuvers that they were not aware of.
Okay, so definitely very cautious Russian commanders here.
So the Russians were always kind of on their back foot when they moved throughout the war. Russian effectiveness was also cut short by a sort of compartmentalization of their forces, where you would see one group of Russian soldiers getting kicked around by the Japanese force, and the group next to them not responding or helping in any way because they would be either preoccupied with a less dangerous threat in front of them or just waiting for orders and not taking any initiative. The Russians did fight well enough, however, that the Japanese were never able to produce a decisive victory over the war on the land. And with the recklessness on the Japanese part, it's kind of hard to determine who really fought better. And now we'll get back to the naval war.
Okay.
After the destruction of the Pacific Fleet, Tsar Nicholas approved a daring plan to sail the Russian Baltic Fleet to Japan to go win the war. And the whole operation was riddled with problems.
Oh. Everything wrong with the Baltic Fleet in 3 minutes or less. Spoilers. Duh. Oh, man. No one told me that there were spoilers in this video. Oh, man, this war is over 100 years old and there's spoilers here? God damn it.
A lot of the Baltic Fleet was extremely inexperienced due to the fact that a lot of the sailors did not come from coastal regions, and they were iced in for a lot of the year, unable to get hands-on training. When leaving the docks for the first time, one ship lost its anchor, and while it was being retrieved, a destroyer accidentally rammed another ship, causing it to have to return for repairs. On the approach to the Denmark Strait, some of the ships became convinced that they had spotted Japanese torpedo boats, and fired on 2 fishermen delivering a dispatch to the admiral whose name is hard to pronounce.
Znovi... I'll call him Roz.
Some of the ships also thought they were going through a Japanese minefield for some reason. After sailing into the North Sea, they fired on a British fishing fleet thinking that they were Japanese torpedo boats.
Russia!
Sinking one and damaging 2 of their own cruisers in the process. This caused 28 British battleships to shadow the Russian fleet until it sailed past Portugal. It also caused the British to shut the Suez Canal to the Russian fleet, making it so that they had to sail around Africa. Upon reaching Africa, the fleet lost contact with one ship that, when alone, fired 300 shells on...
Why would they think... Hold on. Hold the fuck... They thought there were Japanese... There's a Japanese fleet. Or a Japanese group in the Mediterranean, when they would know that essentially the British control the islands of the Mediterranean, that the British control Egypt. Russia, what the fuck?
On European merchant ships as they thought they were Japanese. The Russian crews, with poor morale, attempted to lift their spirits by buying exotic pets on shore visits. One of these being a poisonous snake that got free on one battleship and bit the commanding officer.
What the fuck?
This was one of many animals that were roaming freely on the decks of the Russian ships. In Madagascar, Admiral hard to pronounce became ill with his chief of staff leaving no one in command of the fleet, and the crew spending lots of days on shore, where they picked up lots of disease with many men dying. At one of the funerals for deceased crewmen, a gun salute was arranged with live shells that caused another friendly fire incident.
Oh my fucking... No fucking way.
Around this time, mental illness for being at sea for so long began to affect the crew, and a large wave of religious fervor broke out, with one case of mutiny where the sailors involved had to be sent back home. At
Mutiny!
some point around here, one of the officers bought around 2,000 cigarettes from the shore, which ended up being filled with opium. After recovering, Admiral Consonant Shitshow ordered gunnery practice, but none of his destroyers scored any hits on the target. This included one jammed torpedo that swung off target, causing their ships to scatter in panic. Despite all these setbacks, though, the Russian fleet did eventually make it to Japan. There are even more incidents.
How did they make it to... I'm honestly now wondering how the fuck they made it to Japan without destroying themselves. Or crashing into an island in the ocean. Because they are that incompetent. What the fuck?
On this voyage I cut out for the sake of time, but you can read more about them in the link below. Now, for all of their hardships on their harrowing journey, the Russian fleet met a very unfairy tale-like ending, being all but completely destroyed by the Japanese fleet when engaged, leaving only 2 ships remaining. This defeat, along with the loss of Port Arthur, had made this war extremely unpopular in Russia, and had caused revolutionary activity back home, bringing the Tsar to the negotiation table and ending the war. The terms were very favorable to Japan as they laid the groundwork to annex Korea and gave them confidence in their ability to fight Western powers, but the Japanese populace did not feel that the war gains were worth the cost, a sentiment that had to be repressed by the Japanese government.
Oh.
But this war does have some
oppression. You love to see it.
Very interesting insights and foreboding impacts. Firstly, with Russia, it shows the disdain for the Tsar's rule that is cropping up already before World War I, and that would later lead to his downfall, giving more context for the eventual revolution. For Japan, they would become the first Eastern power to defeat a Western power, and would in the process become an Eastern colonial power, something that they would continue to nurture in the following years, eventually resulting in the Second World War in the Pacific, beginning by taking lands that they wanted back then, eventually being free to do so years later, with the groundwork laid by kicking out the Russians in 1905. The embarrassing defeat at the hands of the Japanese was something that I'm sure the Tsar did not want to get out back home. It did, however, resulting in some very bad PR, although a lot has changed since then.
Oh, that was a smooth transition. Transition potential history. So that was the Russo-Japanese War. I've said what I needed to say here throughout the video. I've got nothing else to add on here at the end. Potential history always doing a fantastic goddamn job. You know I love them. I love him. It's my heart. Okay, now it's just getting weird. I don't know what I'm saying. My mind is an enigma. Insert SpongeBob or whatever, whoever the fuck said it. Right there. Ooh. I'm too lazy to probably edit it in. Ooh. Yeah, I've got nothing else to add. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.